biggest unlock is what happens on the actual construction site. People forget about that. That's the uncontrollable, that's the craziness, that's the chaos. We figured out how to solve that piece.
Alex, great to see you again.
Good to see you, Ty.
Yeah. Let's start off with like last year, I think there was like a shortage in housing of something like 6.5 million homes. Has that like changed at all? Gotten better, gotten worse?
No.
It's really just the same.
Yeah, it's always been bad for the last decade. It's going to continue to be bad. I'd say the recent change is obviously immigration policy has changed. A lot of our workforce are immigrants, not always legal. And I think that the bigger problem is still the aging demographic in construction, meaning there's a lot of folks that are retiring and not a lot of folks replacing them.
And what percentage is that, like retiring the next 10 years?
That stat's still the same one I referenced. It's 7-1. 7 retire, 1 replaces. Yeah. I'd say about 40% of the construction workforce is going to retire in the next 10 years. I think that's still true. But the housing crisis is bad. And what's interesting is over the last year, we've been spending a lot of time in non-US markets as well. And it's not a U.S. problem. It's a global problem. Yeah, mostly in first world countries. That's where you see the biggest housing crisis.
Is there any place that's like worse than the U.S. as far as lack of housing?
That we've been surprised by?
Yeah.
Australia is very, very, very bad. Canada is very, very bad. Yeah.
I know that Canada's prices are just like through the roof as far as cost of ownership.
Supply demand.
Yeah.
Australia also one that has surprised us and has been one that we've been forced to focus on just because of the amount of inbound we get from Australia.
What does that look like?
Australia as a market. I don't know exact numbers, but massive shortage and really massive cost associated where people's incomes is just not even anywhere near to where housing gets built out today. So there's a big affordability crisis.
Yeah. Has there been any like shift in the past few months since the like new administration came in? I know that we're like, looking to build in America again. So
in regards to like building or like solving housing?
Solving housing.
I think the new administration has been a massive tailwind for us specifically because we hit 2 birds with 1 stone in the U.S., right? It's this manufacturing concept of how do we manufacture things, how do we industrialize things here, but also we help solve a bit of the housing crisis, which those 2 conversations are top of mind. I think the election highlighted a lot of the housing crisis, and I think this administration has stayed focused on that, and it's been very much a focus of a lot of governors, more specifically versus the federal government, but that too. They're solving it in different ways. I think I told you before, the problem is twofold. It's bureaucratic, meaning like how hard is it to actually go build a home, and the permitting and certain regulation around building. And I can't solve, neither can Oleg, my partner, the deregulation around building. But that's one issue. And the second one is the skilled labor piece. That's where we step in. By the way, the other surprising countries are the Middle East, but they have a very different problem.
Really?
Yeah, if you take like Saudi Arabia, they need 5 million units of homes.
What?
Yeah, it's just an insane.
Like the U.S. is 6.5, so that's almost the entire U.S.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that matters like what time cycle you take, but the Middle East has been really surprising to us because they need a lot of homes, a lot of net migration, a lot of like growing economy, etc. What's interesting is they don't have any labor, so they import labor from like Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc.
Some poor countries.
That labor is cheap, but it's not skilled to the extent that they need to build the things they want to build. So that's been a very interesting one too.
Have you had any conversations with any of those guys?
Yeah,
what have those been like?
Quite a lot. Middle East is interesting. Conversations to term sheets to execution take a long time. Less transactional market, more relationship driven. They have their own set of nuances. For example, in the Middle East, very stuck on building with concrete. Just it is the way it is, and that's like no answer to it. Just this is how they do it. So we don't yet do precast concrete, but we will. It's something we're working towards in a different version of our technology, but it's been kind of like a preference thing that we've been navigating there. But we're looking to do some pilot units in the Middle East.
Is this one of those things where I know with like actually Isaiah, he's going to, the Philippines or another country to go talk with the government and kind of create a V1 of his product, right? The first reactor to minimize the time it takes to turn it on. Is that something that you guys are thinking about doing?
No, we don't need that. We built around that. So nuclear is very much constraint, not on the technology. There's been like, I don't know much about nuclear, but there's, many iterations of nuclear versions, and none of the problem has been technological. The problem is regulatory related. Although we play in a space that's highly regulated, and people, sometimes they think like nuclear, they get it. They're like, oh yeah, that should be regulated. People forget housing is a highly regulated space.
Yeah.
Building is. There's 26,000 different zoning codes in the US, which is funny to think about, right? Like your neighborhood versus your friend who you competed with, in your high school basketball team in a different neighborhood might have a different zoning code, which is kind of like weird because it's 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
But that's how the US works. So it's a highly regulated space.
Do you know why it evolved that way?
It's one of those things that wasn't like a federal thing. It was like a locale thing. So it was mandated like on a very, very local level. I don't know the reason why. It's just like we started getting more stringent around the safety of, like, obviously it just wasn't as regulated back then. You can build a building in a certain way, and then like over time, it's like this got regulated, and just like a combination of things. But anyway, going back to the nuclear verse kind of us, we don't, although we play in a regulated space, the way we chose to build our business, we don't have any regulatory risk. We look deceptively like traditional construction. Actually, what's funny is the way we put up factories, we're trying to bypass certain regulation, actually. We figured out a clever trick, which is why we make factories the way we make them. But no, we don't need to go to like some country that's like less stringent to do what we do. In fact, the best countries for us are the most stringent, where the arb between that cost of labor, the regulation versus how we build using unskilled labor and via lean manufacturing is the highest. So like it's best for us to be in places like the US, Australia, Canada, Europe, etc.
Yeah, I know, like, you're probably the most efficient company that I've ever come across as far as
We take that as a compliment. Not every investor appreciates it, but
amount of, research and development time that you've been able to, spend versus the dollars used to get that research and development. How is that going to shift over the next few years as you actually start to, build these things and have the mobile microfactories all over the place, actually creating homes?
Yeah. Well, first, I think I made a joke to you is we try to be a cockroach. That's the phase of business we're in, is in the sense like we really care about technical de-risking per dollar. That's like our one metric. I don't remember exactly when we did your other interview, but I reckon we were somewhere at like 350,000 engineering hours. We've since doubled that just about. That has to do with like our hiring. We're now almost 200 folks on the team. Or actually, I think we crossed the 200 mark. And I think we're,
Is
as
it
of last
still
month,
mostly Eastern Europe?
Yeah, it's the most capital efficient way. And it's like, that's not an easy thing to do, that you have to, like, you can't outsource that. Technical IP has to come from, one of the founders. That's my partner. You have to culturally be from the place that you're doing that. You have to have physical setup there. We have 45,000 square feet worth of space there. Our first of a kind is there. So our first iteration of the mobile microfactory, we have a separate documentary coming out about that. And it's, a scaled down version of what we're doing in, our first commercial deployment in Nevada. But yeah, look, it's very important, I think, and we get thrown into deep tech, but we're not deep tech. To me, deep tech is like nuclear. It's like mining asteroids, right? Like that's deep tech. It has binary outcomes. I don't think we're that. But we get thrown into that just naturally because like, oh, you build a lot of hardware.
You're building stuff.
So you get, to me, deep tech is a catch-all in venture ecosystem.
Everything that isn't software.
Basically,
except
or consumer.
For if it's like consumer,
They're like very defined things. But yeah, I would say that we're
just
proud.
Execution tech. Just need to do really well.
Exactly. And just, it does take a lot of engineering, but it's engineering not that hasn't been done. It's taking things that have been done before, combining them, and just spending that sheer amount of engineering hours. We happen to do it in a very capital efficient way. So yeah, we're about 690,000 engineering hours into this. Oleg thinks we need to get to about 750, maybe like 850 to really feel good about our commercial deployment in Nevada. So
interesting. And how did that like commercial deployment in Nevada actually come together?
Our business model warrants that we go anywhere we're wanted, and we can. So just serendipitously ended up in Nevada, basically.
Did you basically like talk with the government there and they were more supportive of engaging early, or?
I think there's definitely an angle where we start engaging with public sector a bit more. Like what governor wouldn't want to solve their state's housing crisis, right? While also creating 260 unskilled jobs, while also producing, $100 million plus of tax revenue, et cetera. We have all these stats that we show, but like, we don't ask for anything at this point in time. Our factory is so capital efficient from a launch perspective. It doesn't warrant getting anything from anyone. we are entering there, and then if someone wants to engage us and be helpful, we take it, but we didn't need that to date.
Yeah. How is the like? I know that you really look up to your co-founder Oleg.
Yeah.
How's that relationship evolved over the past year as
Mhm.
you've just continued to execute?
We have separate lanes, Oleg
Yeah.
and I. Very, very separate lanes, and we stay out of each other's way. But like Oleg doesn't make mistakes, and he goes really fast. I think he is what I think if I was in deep tech, I would be backing the Olegs of the world,
Hmm.
people that can make 51% correct decisions, 49% incorrect, but do it very, very fast to ultimately iterate and get to kind of endpoint as quick as possible. Because a startup, especially in our category, like all you have is a limited amount of time and a limited amount of resources who can get to that like commercialization point the quickest. And that takes like insane resource constraint and focus. So he's been really good at the focus piece.
I know that you're building homes, and I imagine that the like iteration cycle isn't days.
Yeah.
But how do you think about getting a really fast iteration cycle on a
Yeah,
larger product like this?
that's a good question. So our product is maybe like defined in three things or three categories. Like our software actually is it's quicker, but also it's tied to the hardware. So it lags based on the hardware lag, if that makes sense. Because to test the software, you have to go out in the field and build homes.
Actually do stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's the only way you test it. And we built quite a lot of software since we last spoke. I'd say like the biggest progression has been on the software side.
Hmm.
And our hardware is really two things. It's like the factory itself, which is our product that fundamentally is like where all the IP is. And then it's what that factory produces as a byproduct, which are a kit of parts either we're making or prepping, which then make up a home. Um, then there's some hardware that actually lives on site as well, like on the construction site, which is its own thing. But we iterate very quickly on the factory because our R&D center is attached to where we actually build the hardware. So like we have a bunch of folks that will design a piece of machine or
Yeah.
some equipment. We'll go build it, test it, throw it out if it doesn't work, do it again. We do that a lot. So the factory iterates a lot. Um,
Has there been any situations in the past year where you just were like very surprised or got some major unlock that you weren't expecting?
I wouldn't say like a major unlock. I'd say like when we're building homes on site, there's been things that we thought would go well, but they're like, okay, this we're always solving for unskilled labor. Can
Mm.
unskilled labor execute following a set of digitalized instructions, which are dynamically changing all the time because you have different builds? So if in practice unskilled labor isn't able to do something on site, that has to go in the trash. So what Oleg has done is he's defined, let's say there's stages to building a house. Let's say there's, 3 dozen stages.
Mm.
Those stages have sub stages. That forms like, let's call it like 10,000 steps you need to do from factory to building a house. Um, and he's defined those. Any of those that aren't binary, like done or not done, meaning
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Like painting a wall is very subjective. How is that like a thing you did well or not well? Like it's subjective. So any stage that requires subjective thinking, you throw out to then make sure it's a binary like 1-0. So he's done a very good job deleting tasks that or figuring out how to do tasks that become binary versus subjective. So that was like an important learning. What else? There's things that we learned like certain equipment doesn't last long on site. Like okay, so one interesting thing. People solve in offsite construction or modular prefab 3D printing, they're trying to solve for offsite processes. The biggest unlock is what happens on the actual construction site. People forget about that. That's the uncontrollable, that's the craziness, that's the chaos. We figured out how to solve that piece.
So you're just trying to, delete chaos from the system or remove it.
Yeah, end to
Yeah.
end. And like what's interesting is people can produce a kit of parts. Sure, people can produce volumetric boxes, etc. But like it's still some third party installing it. The whole point of our system is if a general contractor had a baby with all the 22 subcontractors who then had cousins that are manufacturers next door, like that's what Cuby is. It's an entire end-to-end system, and it can't be any other way, we believe, as a solution to creating efficient, fast, cheap housing or building methodologies.
Are there any, I guess, there's obviously the regulation side,
Yeah.
right? And you have to solve for that and tackle that. But is there any other, part of the, chain of actually getting houses going from having raw materials to getting houses built, where people are kind of, or some person, I don't know how to describe this, something is fighting you?
Yeah, like the thing we can never control, which is why we're not the developer,
Yeah.
not the group that's buying land, permitting the land, sometimes subdividing or changing zoning, etc. It's the permitting side, so it's that bureaucratic side. We can't control when a developer gets the green light
Mm.
after submitting, like, and saying, "I want to do this in my
Like
land."
submitting a bid
Well, not a
or
bid, but
not.
submit when they buy the land, they, basically they go through a certain process, which this is too technical to get into, but they get into a certain process where they tell the local municipality, here's what I want to build, here's why I'm allowed to go do this, here's like all my proof points around that. Then it takes a certain period of time, and it might require certain, feedback corrections, because before Uncle Sam on that local level says, hey, you can build this. That's when we step in, only when they're ready. And we can't control, and a developer can't control when they get that green light. That's something that needs to change, and that needs to be standardized. I wish there was like a national code, not like 26,000 different zoning codes. And like a place like Nevada or Texas are much simpler to build than like California, right? Or even New York or PA or whatever. There's definitely a blue red state thing here. There's definitely a pattern.
Do one of the, do blue states have more regulation than red states,
Yeah.
or how does that work?
Yeah. So like I would say governor and city mayor skewed on the left tend to be a lot harder and more strict versus a place like Texas or some of the southern states. Yeah, for sure.
Does it really impact the like amount of time
It's
that it
just
takes to
time. Yeah,
launch? Yeah.
it's just time. All else being, we don't really have an issue with regulation. Like again, we built all around that. A lot of folks in our category, they're technologists, they're architects, they step into the space and they're trying to reinvent the wheel. But reinventing the wheel requires kicking down the door of regulation, which is really hard in this category. Remember, we haven't changed the way we build for 100 years, right? So like it's a pretty hard task. We didn't want to play in that, so
Yeah.
we built around it.
Yeah. I know that you've been like at this for a few years now.
Yeah,
What like I when you're first tackling, a big company like this, like a big problem,
yeah.
I imagine that you have some plan in your head. And I also imagine that as soon as you actually try to execute that plan in the real world, it in big ways probably just falls apart.
Yeah,
Um,
businesses like this, you just have to be directionally correct,
yeah.
and you have to pick a big enough TAM where you can slither your way into different directions and still ultimately end up. It's like having the correct vector
Yeah.
alignment and then ending up there versus like you're never going to predict every little chapter. We still have in reference like a 4-phase master plan.
Hmm.
It's 2 pages. That hasn't shifted a single time
Really?
in our 4.5 years. There might have been things that have shifted, like, you know, for example, we just iterated on a factory slightly based on some feedback we got in Nevada from the local municipality. Like easy, like that is still directionally the same thesis, but those are. It's like when you get an engineering problem, you just solve it. That's all. Like you got a problem, you go solve it. It's no different than in anything in life. But you just have to be directionally right. And I think directionally, we're still very much right and haven't shifted from that 4-phase master plan. Things sometimes take longer, cost more, like you wish they were more linear, but they're not. But I think you just have to be directionally right.
Is there any part of that that is like extremely memorable to you on you expected, the company to go a certain way and it just, veered off?
Yeah, for sure. Like probably stuff we wouldn't disclose. But I wouldn't like it's weird to say, but like I wouldn't we don't have like the type of stories where like it's like, oh, we were a day away from like not having any capital, and like we don't yet have stories like that, but I think it's also because I think Oleg and I have like experience from the past that allows us to navigate certain mistakes that might be careless, or call it like first time risk, if that makes sense. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's the correct way of putting it. We've been able to navigate pretty well to date.
You're like more thoughtful about all that's included
I
and
think we are. I
yeah.
think we have experience. I think we're thoughtful. Like I think we're pretty methodical. We've been really selective with our cap table. We don't love venture necessarily as like a long-term plan because of just how we're set up. But today we're de-risking our cost of capital. We want to be one of the earlier stage businesses to unlock massive project finance, which is a form of cost of capital that's asset level backing, meaning like
Yeah.
we don't ever want to be using venture to launch factories. That's not smart or good, unless you're like Enduro, where your cost of capital is just so cheap at this point that like it is probably as cheap as like borrowing bank debt at this point, just because the valuation is so high. Um, Still probably not correct, but like you can get away with it at that point.
At what
Um,
point do you flip from using, the venture equity to
we want
being
to be
able to
now, like
just right now?
we now are in the works of this. Like we have a
Interesting.
project that the returns are strong enough, actually very strong for project finance to find it exciting and take risk on asset level backing. What that means is they're taking risk on that underwritten like factory versus the opco or anything else, which is project finance by definition.
Yeah.
So
Have you, I think you've got like this 200,000 homes built goal,
yeah,
by like 2031 or something like that.
yeah,
Is it somewhere around there?
yeah.
Um,
Well, the goal is like 200 factories. Each factory can do about 200 homes a year, plus minus
yeah,
at scale, meaning each one has to ramp up. Remember I said directionally correct?
right.
Our
Yeah.
business, it's either going to take 10 years or 20 years. And somewhere in between, we can be a $50 billion to $100 billion outcome.
Yeah.
That's based on that 4-phase master plan. Phase one, we want to be the AWS for home building. The infrastructure needs to get out there. It needs to get rooted. That's all the factories we want to put out. We figured out a very scalable, capital efficient way to go launch factories like McDonald's SOP, right? They can just launch these retail things on repeat right now, these storefronts. That's phase one. Phase two, once we have all this infrastructure out there, we can supply all the materials to the factories because each factory consumes about 550 different SKUs of bill of materials. Why can't we supply all those materials to our own factories, right? So that's several billion in top line right there at 30% margin. That's like very typical for materials. Phase three, once all those factories are out there around the globe, why can't we be 20% of the offtake, 30% of the offtake per each factory? Meaning we will smoke our own supply and become the home builder, right?
Yeah.
That's phase three, and we're excited about that. I want phase three to happen as soon as possible, and so does Oleg.
How
But
are you making that happen faster? Like, what's the
there's going to be
lever
some
that you pull
lucky
on?
things that will happen along the way for that to happen. It's a cost of capital equation. That's all it
Okay.
is. And just staying focused and like
So does the
it,
like general market environment actually have like an impact on
no,
your ability?
no,
No,
it's
not
more
at all.
like getting the cost of capital down through proof points of the factories going well to
Hmm.
then borrow a different cost of capital for becoming a home builder, I guess.
Interesting.
And then there's like phase four, which is like rinse and repeat and other asset classes. We don't just want to be doing home building. We want to have other versions of our technology for home building, other asset classes, etc.
Interesting. Are you eventually going to be, building the factories to build factories?
We're already
Is that kind of the
started.
goal?
So I think that's another update since we last spoke. So we're building out our Papa factory right now as we speak. That's going to ramp to 3 factories per year, then quickly to 8, then to 20.
Huh. Okay.
That's the actual Papa factory to build the mobile micro factories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you going to be building those like pop-up factories for other
Just one.
people's?
Just no,
Okay.
just one Papa factory owned by Cuby to make
Interesting.
factories that then go anywhere in the world.
Does it work to just have that also right next to your R&D place in Eastern Europe,
No,
or
we're going to China for that.
you want to China?
Yeah.
What's the like reasoning behind that?
I think we're kind of contrarian on China, right? Because that's been not the consensus at the moment. We looked at India, we looked at Mexico, we looked at the US. The thing that we make and mass produce is not something that China wants to steal. China likes to steal the thing that they can make billions of times.
Yeah.
We make specialized OEM and machines, not that exciting to go copy, and we need to make them in the cheapest place possible,
And does
in the most
China have like
efficient.
way more skilled labor for building this type of thing than anywhere else in the world?
We're setting a base in Tsingtao
Hmm.
for that. Um, if I want a CNC machine, right, and I want it custom tooled with my logo, I can go to like 20 different people around the block and have them all compete on price. And we've done that, and I'll give you like concrete examples. There's things that we try to buy here, there's things that we buy there from OEMs directly with our logo on them for 12x cost reduction. People can cry and debate all they want, but our goal is to put up 100 something factories in the US. So if we have to take 2 steps back to make the factory as cost effective as possible to actually make the unit economics make sense to launch here, we will do that because that's 10 steps forward despite taking 2 steps back.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, look, we have like at this point, like 700 different positions that go into a factory, like of stuff, everything from like a trash can all the way through like custom racks that
It's
we've
just like a
designed.
line item kind of thing.
Yeah,
Wouldn't
like
yeah.
there's a lot. And guess what? What's our container? I mean, what's our factory made of? I just gave it away.
Oh, just like a bunch of like
You,
metal and plastic and stuff.
you've seen our factories made up of a ton of containers.
Yeah.
Where are the world's containers made?
Oh, China
Yeah. So
for shipping.
does it make sense to make our machines, send them to China to package and send? We might as well just make them there, right? It doesn't make sense to send our containers somewhere else and pack them like you just do it there.
Oh, and do you also have like the advantages of, China's just really good at shipping everywhere kind of thing?
No, that you can do that
No.
anywhere. Logistics is like not a problem anywhere. And just obviously tariffs are an interesting thing right now, but even with tariffs, it's just so much cheaper. Like we're talking like magnitudes cheaper.
Hmm.
But look, I mean, it's the Papa factory, ironically, is more capital efficient than our actual mobile micro factories. Um, so we can move at any time somewhere
Really?
else. Yeah.
Are you going to build it in China and then ship it somewhere else? Or are you going to build it in China and just leave it there?
The Papa factory? No, that's a stationary thing.
Okay.
The Papa factory is not a mobile micro factory.
Yeah. Are you going to be doing like multiple of those at
No,
some
I think
point in the
just
future?
one.
Just one?
Maybe like when you talk about like true vertical integration, Oleg and I were talking about this. Like we always joke that we will at some point have to lease like entire cargo ships, like literal cargo ships. And when you think about it, there's a precedent to that. BYD just built the world's largest car transport cargo ship.
Really?
Have you seen this thing?
I haven't seen the ship. I know they
This
just like built the
thing
biggest factory in the
this
world.
thing is insane. The ship itself is insane. It looks like you just put like the World Trade Center on the side and there's like a ship. So you got to look it up at some point. So like when you talk about real vertical integration, it's like you want to get there. Like that's what you want to be doing. So we'll vertically integrate as much as we can, but again, like 10 to 20 years.
Yeah. Is there any outside of like Elon and I guess BYD, is there any other companies that you like really look up to and want to kind of not necessarily copy their model, but definitely emulate it?
I mean, we like reference a couple companies, I think, along the way. I mean, Tesla is definitely like a good reference point, but I don't think for the housing industry, you can compare like housing to the automotive industry
Yeah.
because they make 5 products and they're all the same. That's not what housing is.
It's like
Housing
regulated
is,
completely differently.
and just housing is a different product. Everyone wants their own custom house. No one wants their own like different Camry, right? You just get to buy the same Camry and have some different specs and that's it. So like auto manufacturing are very like stale production systems, meaning like they just produce one thing to change like a different version of a Camry or like the Model Y refresh, right? That was like years in the making because you have to invest like billions of dollars into capex of that production line. Ours needs to be like high volume and high customization production lines. So
Mm.
that's why we standardize the parts and then they come together on site in different permutations. So like all this to say, Tesla is not a good analogy, but the only good analogy from Tesla is that the product is the factory. That's true. Like that's what you have to get to. That's a company we obviously look up to, but most of the principles actually come from Toyota's production system.
Hmm.
Like TPS and lean manufacturing from Toyota, like all of that is really just what we recycle. IKEA is a good example because they're very good at packing things and then like
In small
giving
spaces.
instructions
Yeah.
and it's a good example, but it's hard to like I don't like giving analogies of companies because then someone like claws back at one specific thing as like why it's not an analogy. Like here,
Mm.
IKEA is not technically an analogy because it's not like we hire third-party labor to show up and assemble the home. Like it's our unskilled labor that's putting it together, but also following a set of digitalized instructions. I guess you can reference like Lego, you can reference McDonald's because the goal is SOPs to copy and paste factories like they do storefronts, etc. There's like a little bit of you can pull away from a lot of places.
Interesting. Has hiring changed at all in the past year?
Yeah, I mean, one I think like super fun, exciting hire is we hired a chief of staff. He's awesome, Danny. We had one of our investors helped us with hiring, and we gave her a very weird specific task. We said, amazing engineer, like unbelievable engineer who hates being an engineer and doesn't want to be an engineer anymore. Also speaks Russian. And New York based. That's like a very weird box.
It's a rare combination.
Yeah, very weird
Yeah.
box. She killed it on this. So he's been amazing and been super helpful to us. But a lot of our hiring is still like, R&D focused in Eastern Europe. Yeah, that's been like majority. We'll start hiring now for our Nevada facility in advance because we
Mm.
start hiring folks 12 months in advance of launch. We start training them all because like he's literally put together like these are like 400-page SOPs for launching a factory, what needs to happen. Like, he's really good with this stuff. So we'll start hiring for that pretty soon. So
What's on your mind typically when you wake up in the morning?
um, we start our day with two things. We get a lot of fires that we need to put out, and generally like a lot of inbound that's distracting. We've now started kind of uh, we ask two questions in the morning or relative to every task assignment thing. Like, it falls into two buckets. Either we're reducing burn by monetizing our existing first of a kind facility, which can already produce homes, syndicate of parts anywhere in the world. And we don't like doing it, but we build model units that way in different parts of the world. We get to monetize, cover our burn. So one, does it reduce burn? That thing that we're doing that day, or some assignments and project, etc., using our first of a kind. Second is, does it move the needle to launching our Nevada facility quicker? Yes, no. Like, we're moving pretty fast there. I mean, our land, the 6 acres of land that we bought in Nevada, I don't know many founders that went from 0 to 4 weeks later owning the perfect site in the most cost efficient. I don't want to talk about our structure there, but like the most cost efficient way possible, with great partners, like 4 weeks. That's not
How'd you
some.
get that done? Like, what were the
I
things that you
come
were
from real
looking for and
estate,
stuff?
so
Yeah,
it's,
yeah.
it's a bit
Yeah, a little bit of
easier
an
for us.
advantage.
Yeah. But just, it was also serendipity, worked out. Like, we'll talk more about it in like a full press release that we have coming
Yeah.
soon. But yeah, like, I would say we're moving faster, want to move even faster, but like there's
What's stopping you from just going full throttle,
um
pedal to the metal?
it's a combination of things. Like, we really want to unlock cost of capital correctly. So going out and raising the project finance, there's like an order of things that need to happen. Also, like, the slowness is good because it allows Oleg to test a bunch of things in our first of a kind, where we don't have to make those tests in a full commercial like scale. You don't want to make those mistakes or those tests there. You want to like show up and be like, okay, we're ready to go. So that time is like both um, it's both like a butter knife, but also a sharp knife, I guess.
Yeah.
The butter knife is that, like, hey, like, moving slowly sometimes helps because you can, melt the butter better. Then the sharp knife is like, oh shit, you can cut yourself a little bit because you're moving slower than you want. But it's moving how it's supposed to. Like, that's.
Yeah. Is there anything that like is weighing on your mind a lot?
I think, just two founders, always thinking about capital, thinking about, the sheer responsibility of like overselling, but then over delivering. I think it's important. Just, we got to solve for those two things. We want no dependency on anyone else. Therefore, we want to basically have revenues equal burn. That's a really good place to be in. And then second, we want to, go launch this thing that's never existed in the world. Just as soon as like you can do this third interview, and I showed you what the Nevada one's going to look like. As soon as like we can do it there, this is a very different company. This has never existed in the world. And it's funny because a lot of people have been drawing parallels between what Elon has done to reduce the regulation risk of him having to expand this Fremont facility and putting up these temporary structures and putting
Putting the tent up and all that stuff.
if you think about it, I guess, and squint really hard, that's what Cuby set out to do day 0. So we just figured out a much better way to do it.
Do you think that you're going to be able to deploy the factories much faster
With
once you
time?
have the Nevada factory done?
Actually, we're
Factory
moving
done.
pretty fast in Nevada. We have a lot of public sector support. Like, there's a couple things. We figured out how to actually do it from a regulatory perspective fast. That's not the problem. We're constrained on, it takes us 10 months to make the factory. And then it gets
And this
sent.
is what the China situation will unlock.
Yeah, it'll be faster, but I don't think it's ever faster than like 6 months of production. Yeah.
And you have to like plan out, is that the main constraint for timelines on you have to, if your end goal is to just ship lots of homes, then you have to have these factories. And so, if it's 6 months lag time, are you going to be able to build more than one at the same time?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Well, for sure, that's what we're underwriting. Like, again, no one's ever scaled factory building, right? Because most folks, they don't have decentralized factories. They have a centralized factory that does a shit ton of volume.
Yeah.
So they don't need to go scale factories. Like, you take even like a car manufacturer, they might have 10 factories. That's it at most, right? And those are billions of dollars and took like 10 years in the planning and making, et cetera. Our business is a bit different. That's more akin to like McDonald's has an equation that works. There's regional folks that are responsible for regions. There's local folks, sub-regions that are responsible for launches. Like, that just becomes a function of SOPs. right? Like the standard operating procedures that are required to launch those things on a rinse and repeat. And it's an equation that works well. We're hoping to get to that same equation, but for launching factories, which is like a weird thing to say or look at, but that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and for the like actual fundraising side, has kind of the playing field shifted a little bit in, let's say, the last like 12, 24 months from where you initially started out? Um,
It's funny, like
do investors get it?
I think they get it more because there's more to show. And like we have this documentary that I sent you to watch just to get feedback on that hasn't come out yet. Um, you and a lot of friends of ours, they see what we're doing, and no one believes the amount of capital we've raised to do that. I think that's like the common equation. Like we really have done a lot and have a lot to show for it. Again, also a double-edged sword. What's interesting is when you're a founder in deep tech, it's almost easier to raise and sell like a thing that doesn't yet exist because you show a ton of renderings, you sell this like vision, like
You're
humanoids.
pre-revenue.
Humanoids are like the best example because you're like, well, this is the biggest TAM in the world because you can cover every industry. Like, yeah, that's true, right? Like, okay, cool. Let's underwrite that possibility that one day they get there. But the more you de-risk, the more someone's like now expecting the realness of it come
To
to
come to
fruition.
fruition, yeah.
But historically, I think we've underraised relative to what we've done. I think our problem with Oleg is we've built real things before. So instead of selling venture the pipe dream, we're telling them how much we've de-risked, and we always forget that venture is not about de-risking. It's about optimizing for, unlimited potential because their risk is downside. They put in $10 million. That's your downside risk. That's it. You can't lose more than that. So they're solving for unlimited upside. And it's not easy to go see our first of a kind in Eastern Europe. That's the other limitation. So I think we raise at probably 4x from our B1 that we just raised once that Nevada facility is there and you can tour it.
Have you experienced like, have the investors that were interested, have they actually like flown to Eastern Europe to go
Yeah,
tour that
some
factory?
have. Yeah, some have. Mostly customers come, like folks who are launching
Really?
factories with less so investors. Because like we do a pretty good job with our data room and the amount that we show, and like I'd say we have an overwhelming data room. There's a lot to dig through. We do a good job documenting everything. But it would be easier if this was in California.
Yeah.
That being said, if this was in California, let's take 690,000 engineering hours. Let's assume an average hourly rate for
It's
an
like
employee.
150, 200 an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. So do the math. We would have had to raise 5 to
Hun-
10x more than we've raised. That's to me a lot more risk than saying, oh, like they have R&D in Eastern Europe. It
Yeah.
depends how you quantify risk. To me, risk is like losing $150 million of investor money feels like a pretty big risk versus like someone arguing that maybe there's geopolitical risk that you R&D somewhere else. Okay.
Do you think it's also easier to sell kind of the vision if you're only raising, 1/10 the capital that you would have
Um,
to?
Surprisingly, no.
Really?
I almost, if I were to do it all again, I wouldn't. We're very adamant about a concept called sources and uses in private equity and real estate, right? It's like your sources is where you get capital from, debt and equity. Your uses is what you're going to spend it on. Those things equal out in a financial model. A lot of founders, they just raise and like say, oh, I'm going to use some of it here, some of it there. Like they're not actually like, oh, it's going to go to these specific places because I've modeled it out and I know where I'm going to spend it. They raise for the sake of raising as much as they can get. We've been stringent about like sources equal uses until the next milestone. It's a scary way to run a business, but you're optimizing for hitting that next milestone in a resource constrained way. You tend to innovate better that way. Oleg believes that. If you're cash rich, then you just throw cash at the problem and you don't ultimately get to the most efficient solution. That's
Yeah.
one. But like when you raise sources to uses, we've also raised a lot less than like, I feel like if we went out early on, or like we need $100 million, it would have been actually almost easier
Yeah.
than raising like first, some nominal amount, like 5, then 10, then 20. Like, it's
Like I imagine that the capital provider would also be different. And so I imagine
yeah,
that their way of thinking
yeah, a
would be
little
slightly
bit,
different than
a little bit. I don't think we're the best fundraisers, candidly. Like, um, you know,
at least short term. It's ironic, but like the best fundraisers are the people that are just great executors over a long time
agreed.
span.
So one of our investors, that led our B1, Abdo from Type 1 and Tarek as well, his partner. They always say that they invest at inflection point. They're like, you
Mm.
guys are at such an under optimized inflection. Like this is a no brainer given the inflection that's coming. we believe that at some point folks will be begging us for capital, but ironically, like we won't need the capital then because that's when you get non-venture capital when it starts working.
Yeah.
Like we would never take it. Like
Because
we
you're
want to
just so
get to,
efficient that you're just basically like spitting out houses for almost nothing kind
well,
of thing.
venture, we need just to launch that first MMF, right? Once it's launched, it should be cash flowing, but two, now we have something to show project finance going forward. And like any subsequent factories launch then with a different cost of capital that's cheaper, which is not venture capital. So why would we take venture? So it's this chicken or the egg thing that sucks. But
Do you think that it would have even worked out if you had raised much more money? Like, would that have actually been a detriment?
I think you dilute more, and I think people forget deep tech is a long journey.
Yeah.
I'm just seeing some of these raises, and you can back into math. A lot of young first-time founders, they don't understand. Like their journey is long. They will end up with 1% of the business, then they won't be interested in 7 years to build that business and take it to the end. So that's where I think like these over-optimized, highly dilutive rounds, even though you're getting a lot of cash, which I think can be perceived. You can argue it's de-risking because then you can have more, I guess, runway to make the mistake. But that could be a detriment too. But yes, in some cases, it would be nice to like have maybe 5 to 10 million more of cushion, but just execute. It forces you to execute.
Yeah. What are you most excited about over the next 6 to 12 months?
It's one thing to like constantly be staring at like SolidWorks files of your factory. It's another thing to like see this thing getting built and
How long has
touring
that process been from like starting that process for Nevada and actually, having
Well,
it
we're
come to
starting to
fruition
make the factory, like
right now?
actually make it
Yeah.
now, like the machines and the container. Like we're starting to make all of that now. We're starting to also like do everything required of the land, so controlling it, then actually doing the infrastructure cost in the land, which is exciting, and the prep. And then I'm talking about like the actual step of setting up the factory on that land. That's going to be a really fun milestone over the next 12 months or so.
Awesome. Okay. Let's end with, what's the like most painful thing that you've experienced in the last year?
Most painful thing we've experienced. I don't know, like fundraising sucks. It's I don't think we're strangers to being told no per se, right? Like that's the name of the game. But it sucks when you're told no for not good reasons. That like you can't underwrite the other person's risk, right? Like they're just blatantly wrong, I would say.
They just don't understand it.
Yeah, and the frustration has been is like there's so much diligence you can actually do to de-risk us as an investment. There's so much, but I think the way that venture works is it's not an efficient use of time to go into deep diligence. And like when you have companies that are so vertically integrated where the iceberg, like you have to get deep and deep and deep to understand like how deep that iceberg is. I think investors don't have the time to actually go that deep, only to be told no in committee. So it's like not a good use of time in a way. So the model fundamentally doesn't work well for most people, actually.
Yeah. Is this like, is it kind of also that you just don't have like an insane amount of hype? You're not an AI startup. You're not some.
I think we should have done a better, like candidly, I think like what you're doing, what like Jason, has done with like S3, I think over investing actually in that is great.
In
I
like
think.
media and.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
a lot of deep tech is show versus tell. And ironically, like I feel like these deep tech investors are not always super technical. So listen, it's not a bad thing. Like like it's not a bad thing at all. That like I'm glad that people are excited about big categories that actually move the needle for like
Yeah.
humanity in some way, and make it more exciting.
You can't be an expert at like housing, nuclear, weather
Yeah.
modification,
Well,
quantum
I will say
computing.
it's been more fun to like work with investors that have manufacturing background or have invested in deep tech before it was like a cool thing. And I'd say like our investors fall in those buckets, or have like some engineering background. But yeah, like I think investing in some of that media collateral narrative building, I think is important. Yeah, I think that would have.
Do you think that the investors that you've gotten because the process has been so hard for raising have been better or more aligned with your mission?
I think they're also highly technical.
Interesting.
We do a lot better with investors that are incredibly highly technical because they appreciate the massive moat we've built.